Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and today I have Justin Elzie, my colleague, friend, and fellow astrologer joining me today for the July overview. How you doing, Justin?
I'm doing great and ready and excited to talk about July with you.
Yes, a lot going on for July. So we're doing the astrology forecast for July. Justin is an archetypal and Jyotish astrologer, teacher, author, and Buddhist. And the best way to get a hold of him is through his email, justin.lz@gmail.com. And I'm an astrologer, author, intuitive, certified relationship astrologer, and dwarf planet graduate. And my website is alightpath.com. And we both enjoy hearing from all of you. And we start, the sun's in Cancer. So we're going to start with talking a little bit about Cancer. And I know on other shows I've talked about Cancer. So some of this might be repeating, but it's still for those that haven't watched a show for a while, they might not know. So Cancer is a water element. It's about feelings and emotion. And the ruling planet is the moon, and the mantra is I feel. And Justin, can you tell us the keywords and cautions, please?
Sure. So the keywords are nurturing, caring, family can represent family, or if a person needs to feel like a family, they're a part of a family. It represents mother, of course, security, children, emotions, feelings. And there's a sensitivity to Cancer. Be warm and sentimental, definitely sentimental and focused on domestic issues. Some of the cautions, or we can say the opposite of where maybe the lower form or frequency of Cancer can play out, is being too extremes, so overly sensitive, or to where you can't even. Uh, when we say overly sensitive, it's more people that can't function in society because of the emotions. It's too overly sensitive, or emotional rationalization, emotionally rationalizing something when everybody says logically you shouldn't, but you emotionally rationalize it anyway, or the lack of boundaries, the excessive need of separation. And there can be a controlling aspect with emotions, and which, of course, then passive aggressive can be some of that thing. So it's a little bit, and Liz, I always like to kind of look at what, let's say that you have Mercury in Cancer, then you can be an emotional communicator. If you have Mars in Cancer, then you trust your emotions first, or your feelings first when taking action. If you have Jupiter in Cancer, which Jupiter is currently in Cancer, as we're going to talk about, which then that means that then you grow through family, or that things need to feel like a family to you, even work, and there's this need to express for you to grow as a soul. If you have Jupiter in Cancer, of course, you'd be having your Jupiter return right now, which is every 12 years, and it's a period of growth for them. But if you have your Jupiter in Cancer, then it's really important for you in work to express emotions, which is the depth of the soul. Saturn in Cancer, of course, again, um, family is a big part of that. Uranus in Cancer, the personal tend to go outside the bounds of traditional family, include other people that are like family, like their best friend could feel like a family to them. And then, of course, Pluto in Cancer, which my father had, God rest his soul. There's definitely the lesson in life around what truly is family and what defines family. So that's just kind of my thoughts on that. What about you? What do you think, Liz?
Oh, yeah. It's like I have Mars in Cancer. And so I filter through that Mars in Cancer because it's in my first house. And, kind of stick up for the family and and trust my instincts or my intuition. It's like it usually does not falter for me. It's usually pretty accurate.
Well, I guess I should, for transparency's sake, I should say I'm also a Cancer. I'm a Sun Cancer. So,
Okay. So did you say what Sun in Cancer was? I don't remember if you did or not.
oh, Sun in Cancer.
Mhm.
I think
The
it's the essence of the personality is always focused on. I just feel like it's really the whole world is an emotional ball for a person who's a Cancer. The world is all about emotions, even subconsciously.
Mhm.
So whether it's taking action or relationship or talking or doing anything, there's always an emotional aspect to it that relates to the successful outcome of the situation.
Thank you for adding that. So, as we enter the month of July, I like to look at the chart for midnight of the first, and the moon phase will be in a crescent phase. So, that is oftentimes a time of opportunities, and it's 72 degrees away from the sun. So, that's a quintile. So, it's a crescent quintile, and the moon is at 22 degrees Virgo and 43 minutes. So I'll be having a lunar return that day because that's the degree of my moon.
Mhm.
And then the ascendant's at 14 degrees Pisces and the midheaven's at 22 Sagittarius. So it's kind of interesting in the chart for Seattle that we have two positions at 22 degrees, which is a four. And so it's about fours are about building. Do you want to add anything, Justin?
No, no, no. I think you got that covered.
So, out of bounds planets this month, we have the moon from July 7th through the 11th and July 21st through the 24th. And an out of bounds planet is a planet that exceeds the declination of 23 degrees and 27 minutes north or south. And the planet is acting on their own out of the bounds of the sun. Would you like to say anything more?
Yeah, I would definitely say this is something I would say is probably a little bit more important that people want to pay attention to. That the signs that the moon is in from the 7th through the 11th, or the zodiac signs that the moon is in from the 21st to 24th. If if it's, let's say it's in Virgo, it's going to act probably a little bit more in larger than life with a Virgo. I mean, they're not going to act like a normal Virgo or a normal Leo or whatever signs the moon's in. It's going to act a little bit over the top, possibly, or outside of the normal bounds of that. So it's kind of something to pay attention to.
Well, and next month I'll add what signs that's gonna be, because generally speaking, the moon goes out of bounds when it's in Gemini or Cancer, and I think it's Sagittarius and Capricorn, but I'll have to check to make sure that I'm correct on that, but if my memory serves me, that's what it is. And then planets that are changing signs this month, on the 4th, we have Venus moving into Gemini. On the 7th, Uranus will move into Gemini. On the 22nd, the sun moves to Leo, and on the 30th, Venus will move into Cancer. So Venus is moving pretty quick right now.
Hmm.
And you can tell us about planets stationing retrograde and direct, please.
So this month of July, on the 4th, Neptune stations retrograde in Aries. And then on the 10th, Juno, which represents marriage or relationship, it's an asteroid, stations direct in Scorpio. And this is kind of important. Juno in Scorpio, there's a lot of stuff going on with our relationships and emotions and relationships in the collective. On the 12th, Saturn stations retrograde in Aries. As we know, Saturn and is definitely going to go back to Pisces, so it's something to pay attention to. On the 17th and the 18th, Mercury stations retrograde in Leo, and sort of because Mercury in Leo is about creative thinking, creative thinkers. This could be a time when people actually second guess some of their creative projects or edit them and so forth. On the 30th, Chiron stations retrograde in Aries.
Yeah, we have 3 planets this month stationing retrograde in Aries. This will be an interesting time for sure.
Yeah.
So from July 1st to the 10th, um, on the 4th, there's a lot happening on the 4th, and in the United States, we celebrate Independence Day. So we have Venus conjunct Uranus, and the dates that we use here on the overview for the month is when they're exact. So it's always important to remember that as they're coming together, this energy could be felt for several days or even weeks before and several days after and all that. So we have that Venus conjunct Uranus. in Gemini, and then we have Venus will move into Gemini, and Neptune will station retrograde. So that's a pretty active day. Then on the 6th, we have Venus in Gemini sextile Saturn and Neptune in Aries. And then on the 7th, Uranus moves into Gemini, and Venus in Gemini will trine Pluto in Aquarius. And then on the 10th, we have the Capricorn full moon and Juno stationing direct in Scorpio. So, do you want to talk about a couple of these points?
Well, I like how there's a little bit of a focus in this first week on Venus, since it's in Gemini, and Venus in Gemini is about the beauty of communications or the desire to communicate. And it's noted that there's a large focus on the Gemini thing this month because Uranus, of course, moving into that. Um, and of course, the next week, which we'll get into, Mars squares that Venus and Hygeia in Gemini for at least a couple of weeks. Venus, and then it continues to square Hygeia. So I think there's definitely a communication thing going on this month, to pay attention to our communications. And I think when it hits Uranus, it's a really good period for starting new projects, new creative writing project or film projects or anything to do with communications. Is I think it can be a very positive thing. Maybe a little chaotic too. Is that with the Uranus and Gemini? What do you think?
Well, in the first 10 days, we have Neptune stationing retrograde and Juno stationing direct and Uranus moving into Gemini. So those are outer planets. So we're going to feel that a week to 10 days before it even happens, and we're going to feel it for a week to 10 days after, especially with those outer planets.
Yeah.
So it's like a big energy shift. So it'll be interesting how, we do it as the world, and how we do it as a country, and how we do it personally. So I would just say, be gentle with yourself because there's a lot of changes happening. And I think I've been
Yeah.
saying that for a few months now, but it's
Well, yeah,
continuing.
well, you had exactly, and you and I talked about that prior. That look at, we got Jupiter's in the first degrees of Cancer. Venus is going to go. Well, it's in the beginning of the month. It's in the first degrees of a sign, last degrees of a sign, first degrees of a sign, and at the end of the month it'll be in the first degrees of a sign. And of course, Saturn's in the first degrees of a sign. Um, Neptune's in the first degrees of a sign. Mars is going through the last decan of by the end of the month and be near the end of the sign. So there's a lot of shift between signs. And as you and I were talking about earlier, you were saying that really is indicative of the kind of the shift in society, weren't you saying something like that?
Well, and it's like, I kind of used the analogy of, it's like if you had a new job, or even the job you have, it changed locations, or maybe your town closed down and you had to move somewhere. Now you have to get this new feel of how it's going to work and get acquainted with the area and familiarize yourself. Because even though maybe your position didn't change, you're still going to have upgrades and things are going to work a little
Right.
different.
And one of the things that I think it's interesting, Liz, that I found in my experience, I'd be curious what you think. But when there's this void, of course, as we say, the planet's going between signs energetically, a lot of times we see dynamics, especially with fire, water. But I think there's also dynamics when you're going from earth to air, right? And air to, which we see here with Venus this month is going from earth to air and then air to water. That there's an elemental shift that happens. And I think a lot of astrologers don't necessarily talk about this, the kind of the subtle things that you can't really put your fingers to. There's a subtleness and change in elemental energy around that, and that plays out in different ways.
When planets are, from 0 degrees to 3, 4, 5 degrees even, it's like they're young and they're getting a new feel, and, how is that gonna work? Because in those first few degrees, it's like you might have a plan, but usually if it's in the young degrees, those first 5 degrees, there's gonna be a lot of changes and adjustments to that of what you originally planned.
Right. And then of course you got to take into account, what is the element? Is it an emotional feel with a water, or is it an anxious or anxious or restlessness with a fire sign, or an air sign, or is it just doesn't want to move very far, very quickly in an earth sign, So that kind of overlays on top of it too.
Right, it takes time to integrate that new energy. So be
Yeah.
patient with yourselves and those are, other people around too, so. Okay, so now we're gonna look at the Capricorn full moon at 18 degrees Capricorn on July 10th. And the aspects to the moon are a sextile to Juno in Scorpio and North Node in Pisces. And then we have a trine to Mars in the South Node in Virgo, and a square to Ceres in Aries, and a quincunx to Hygeia in Gemini. So go ahead and talk to any of those that you'd like to.
Well, the thing that jumps out to me is, of course, the Mars moon trine, that easy flow of energy between that critical, that discerning, that wanting to perfect things, Virgo, Mars and Virgo, and fix things and strategize things and compartmentalize. And of course, the moon, it's in Capricorn, wants to control the situation and everything, stability. So this could be a time when people are maybe a little bit more dominant or forceful with power in the society. We can see this on a mundane level. This could be a time when leaders take on a more forceful action with things. Um, but in our own personal lives, boy, that is a great time to get things in order, and to plan something and to build something and to rearrange the deck, so to speak, even maybe literally, as I know you got a beautiful deck with a bunch of flowers and plants. It could be the time when you rearrange those things.
I like to rearrange things, that's for sure. Yeah, so with
Well,
Ceres there, we've got a T-square going on with that full moon. Um, so, how we nurture ourselves and others, there could be some changes coming up with that, or maybe people are, you know, having their family grow in some respects. So, what would you say?
Well, I want to speak to another aspect, if I could. I think you got that one pretty spot on there. I think again, back to the Gemini and the communications, which is going to be crazy going forward here. We've got Uranus moving into Gemini, which we know is the United States has Uranus in Gemini in its natal chart. But I think the Moon being in conjunct there, quincunx means it's out of balance with Hygeia, really speaks, and because we got the Venus and the Uranus there as well. I think this is really where we could see, because if a person has Hygeia and Gemini, there could be issues in their life with people that are bullying them with communications, bullying. And we of course see that in our society today. Won't mention any names, but we all know who I'm talking about. But I mean, there can be people that really do really forceful or dynamic or even maybe hurtful communications with Hygeia and Gemini. And so I think this is time to really pay attention to those situations with that that moon in Capricorn that wants to control things. This could be a time when we maybe watch how we're talking to others, so it doesn't sound like we're beating them down or we're talking down to them maybe.
Well, and even being mindful of how you communicate, perhaps, or how you talk, because something we say could be very innocent, but it could be wounding or hurtful to somebody else. So, it might be a good thing to talk about if it was wounding to somebody and that was not your
Right.
intention to clarify, perhaps.
I might note I just saw a hummingbird out the window here. Just came right up to the window. Hummingbirds are how they represent the heart and communications as well. So
Well, and it could be a time to address if there's any mental health issues going on that, to seek help or um, have a counselor or journal about it might be helpful.
absolutely, I agree totally.
So, anything else you'd like to share about the full moon?
No, I think you got it covered.
Well, and we'll be back in a week or so and talking more in depth about the full moon. So,
Yeah,
okay, so from July 11th to the 23rd, on the 12th to 13th. And why I have the 2 dates is because on the West Coast, it's on the 12th, and on the East Coast of the United States, it's on the 13th. Saturn stations retrograde. Then on the 17th, 18th, we have Mercury stationing retrograde. On the 19th, Sun in Cancer will square Chiron in Aries. On the 20th, Mars will conjunct the South Node. On the 22nd, Sun will move into Leo. On the 22nd and 23rd, Sun in Leo sextiles Uranus and Gemini. And on the 23rd, we have Venus in Gemini squares Mars in Virgo, and also squares the lunar nodes on the 15th. And then the new moon in Leo is on the 23rd, too. And so the first one we had planet stationing, then, I kind of divided the month into 3 sections. Then the second third of the month, we have more planet stationing. So I always think of when planet stationing, it's like something trying to stop really, really fast. And so it's like it kind of, you could either skid, or if you're in a boat, the waves kind of you're churning it up. So when planets are stationing, retrograde or direct, it's like a little bit more intense.
Right, right. Yeah, that's definitely a good way to see that. I agree with you. The first actually the first one jumped out to me, the Saturn retrograde. I know I don't usually talk about retrogrades too much, but I think this one, because it's Saturn, it can represent for people's lives, especially since it's Saturn in Aries, wanting to start new things. It's at an entrepreneurial Aries spirit, that this could be the time when those, because Saturn represents taking on new responsibilities, being disciplined. This could be where, if you have started a business in the last 3 or 4 months, where maybe some questions about some dynamics around the business, especially around responsibilities, and you may also be questioning how much you want to dedicate yourself to a new project, because Saturn retrograde questions it's it's discipline or focus in that, and then of course right after that, when Mercury's going retrograde, again there's a second guessing of what maybe our communications or the energy that we're putting into projects, starting new projects. So I like what you say. Sometimes retrogrades is sort of like a revisiting the experience and saying, okay, maybe I need to revisit plans or rethink something here.
Yeah, it's a big time for me, or I like to say, to review and see, does that still work? And I want to mention the Saturn and Neptune. They've been traveling really, really close together for months and will continue, and will not have their exact conjunction till early next year. But in this chart, we can see they're 15 minutes apart. So they're super, super close. It's like they're in the same room and they're really, really close, but they just haven't kissed yet, so to speak.
Right.
So, that energy is very prominent for everybody.
Yeah. And I have to bring in the mundane aspect here with the Sun in Cancer squaring Chiron in Aries. I think we're seeing this. I have to say, this is what we see playing out in our society today with Sun in Cancer. Of course, we talked about this. This is about family and about where we feel like family and our concern about family and who has to be nurtured. But because it's squaring Chiron in Aries, which is about the valuing of individuals or devaluing of individuals. I think we see this going on with the immigration thing in our country, where we see families being torn apart, and as the collective valuing that individual or who they, because also Chiron in Aries is about how one identifies. Birthright citizenship comes into play, or are you an immigrant, or are you a citizen? So there's an aspect of that if you're in a mundane astrologer, that's kind of how that theme is playing out there. And I think it just really, me as a Cancer, and I know you got Mars in Cancer, it's really about, we that Cancer energy just wants us, can't we all just be family, because we all are family, and we want people to be nurtured and families to be taken care of. And I think that's a challenging time for us right now in the collective, because it's gonna, this month I think will highlight more the family and children aspect, because the Cancer and Jupiter's in Cancer now, so it's going to inflate the family and Cancer and energy. So I think it's going to become a kind of a major theme. What do you think?
Oh, I would agree. And that Mars conjunct the South Node. Justin and I will be coming back in a couple of weeks to have a show about that conjunction, but also the North and South Node, and kind of how they're doing in Pisces and Virgo. So that's an interesting show coming up. And it's making a T square with Venus and the nodes and Mars. So that's the Mars and Venus being square. It's also including that north node. So what adjustments do we need to make to um, have what makes us feel safe and secure, but also that we have the energy to move forward with?
Yeah, and I agree. And another aspect, there could be a positive aspect of the Venus and Gemini squaring Mars and Virgo. I mean, you're a writer, and you know that that this could be a time, because Venus is about the beauty of communications, and Mars is about fixing something or improving something and taking action. And that this can be the time when we start to change the way we think, or the way we're communicating, or we edit what we're communicating about. And also, because Venus and Gemini can also represent singers. This could be a time when somebody improves their singing, their voice. So the Virgo wants to improve the Gemini, and I think the square creates a situation or tension that we're forced to change our thinking or our communications in a way of that. What do you think?
Oh, I would agree. And that, reminds me, okay, that's a good time that I should be working on revising my book. So,
There you go. Had to bring that in, right? Yep.
yes, yeah. Well, it's like when I can associate it with something that's going on in my life, then that's easier to grasp. So, did we talk about the sun sextile to Uranus?
No, we didn't. What do you think about that one?
Well, it's at 0 degrees, so it's a very young degree. It's like just barely, Uranus has barely been in Gemini, and the sun will be at Leo at that point. So it'll be interesting to see. I would say pay attention to um, what you hear, what you see, what's communicated, because it might trigger and facilitate some ideas or of how you want to move forward, or maybe becoming more in a loving way towards people or community, yourself, all of it.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing I would add on to that is that I kind of go back to how I know that when the Sun and Uranus are conjunct in people's charts, it's really an unusual individual, right? Because Uranus is about rebellion, revolution, change, and what makes a person unusual, and they tend to be very unusual, having a Sun Uranus conjunction, and tend to have a lot of changes in themselves, and how they identify themselves and their core, their being. And I think with the here that it's a sextile has a little bit of that same energy. I agree with you. I think there's because Leo is about creativity and fun. This could be the time when, if a person's a writer, they could really start a good creative fun project. Or this could be a time when somebody takes the family and goes to the fun park. I mean, there's something here with the Sun and Leo being that creative and authentic self, that there's something changes at this particular point in time, maybe how we communicate or what we're writing or putting out to the collective.
Well, and pay attention to any new ideas or that come to you, because they could be genius ideas in a way.
Oh, absolutely. Wow. Thank you for adding that. That was great how you stated. That's right. That. Yeah. This would be great for anybody who's an artist.
Well, and everybody in general, that
Yeah.
something new comes about and it's like, "Oh, wow, I didn't think of it that way, and that really works." Okay, now we're gonna go to the Leo new moon at 2 degrees of Leo and the aspects to the moon. We have a sextile to Uranus and Gemini, a trine to Saturn and Neptune in Aries, opposite Pluto in Aquarius, square Chiron in Aries, sesquiquadrate to the north node, semi-square to the south node in Hygeia and Gemini. Boy, a lot going on with this new moon.
Yes. Yeah. What jumps out to you at the chart first?
Well, I would just say a lot of adjustments and, you know, knowing that we need to make some adjustments and changes, kind of don't overreact to whatever that information that comes through. Just like take a breath, think about it and process it, and then you can act. And I'm just looking
Right.
at the aspects. I'm not looking at, the aspects to each other, what planets are involved, because the planets certainly inform. So,
No, I agree. I think this is a really crazy month because is what we talked about before. So many of the planets are in similar deacons. It's like this month, a lot of the planets see one another. And so a lot of them are interacting this month. So this is like a month that a lot's going on. I would agree with you there. And this new moon is a great example of that. The one thing that really jumped out at me on this was the Pluto opposition, the Sun Moon opposition with Pluto, and I think again. I think it's a very dynamic effect where we could see some like big change in entertainment. Maybe a company gets bought out, or somebody changes their creative project. This is Pluto has a tendency, like Uranus, to change things outside our control and just rearrange the table here. And with it, because it's an air sign with a fire sign, it brings out an individuality in individuals and a need to be creatively expressful.
well, and I would say, are your words matching what you're doing? Because
Yeah.
there could be like kind of a check on that, like to check in with that. It's like, okay, there's something not quite matching up, and how can I adjust that to let it match up? Like, are you coming from integrity? Are you coming from a heart center? And not that there's anything bad about it, but it's just like you might need to review that. And okay, it's like, I'm trying to cover this flaw about myself, but instead of embracing it and working on to improve it, ignoring it's not going to help, is what I would say.
Yep, I would agree.
And then another thing that jumps out at me is so many things at 2 degrees, the sun and moon, Pluto, Neptune, Saturn's really close to 2 degrees. So we have several planets at two. So the number two is about partnership, duality, balance, bringing things back into balance.
Well, and to your point, they're all within. Again, this is why they all see one another, right? They're all interacting because they're all within the first deacon, and I think this really speaks to something you said earlier. They're really young and mature in where they're at right now with their processes.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, um, do you wanna talk to any of those other aspects? Because 'Cause we'll be on
No,
Talk Cosmos talking about the new moon, and then I have another show on the new moon that will get more into
yeah.
detail
So
later in
get your new information on Liz's channel here. So,
lots of choices,
yep.
the shows to watch. So, for the rest of the month, we have July 24th through the 31st, and we have Sun and Leo is trine Saturn and Neptune. On the 24th and 25th, the Sun in Leo is opposite Pluto, exact, and on the 28th, Venus in Gemini is sextile to Chiron in Aries. On the 30th, Chiron stations retrograde, so another station, and Venus moves into a new sign, Cancer. And on the 31st, Sun conjunct Mercury in Leo. So, pretty much every part of the month has a planet stationing retrograde or direct. So, there's going to be the energy is going to be what I would call high. There's going to be lots of energy and lots of movement.
Yeah, and I know we were talking about this a little bit, and I was just going to speak to this, but Mars is really every square that we talked about. Mars is happening with Hygeia and Venus, and then its conjunction with the South Node is still taking place here. And even though we don't have it, there was too much here to put on. Into August 1st, Mars is trining Uranus, still squaring Hygeia, conjuncting the South Node. It's really playing a role here in this whole dynamic. And the thing that jumped out to me at this here was I really like the Sun conjunct Mercury. Um, to me, that's a really positive aspect. For even though Mercury's retrograde at that one point there still is this very creative thinking type of energy going on and spontaneous energy going on that could actually, with Pluto being involved there with Leo there, and we saw this on the new moon, but it now Mercury's coming into play there, that this is a really spontaneous time of new ideas, new creativity for people, good time to start a new project, um, creative project with that. But also interesting for our communications. People are going to be coming across more self-authentic in some ways and really expressing themselves.
Right, so this month there's a heck of a lot going on, so enjoy the ride, but be patient with yourself and breathe is what I would say.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
anything else you wanna add?
No, not on this one exactly. I do love, just as a side note, that we're all. I think Cancer energy, back to the beginning to kind of summarize it, I think is really important, because of course the Sun is there, and then of course Venus is going into it, which is auspicious. So we may see some there at the end of the month with Venus going into Cancer into August. We may see a lot of people. Um, and if you have a Venus in Cancer, you're having a Venus return, so there's some evaluation of desires and affections. Might be questioning your desires and affections in relationships or with children or with family, but it's also a good time to really express emotions. So be willing to express your emotions. And with Jupiter going through Cancer, this is the time to really focus on food and family and love with that. I would say that's speaks a lot to me on that.
Well, and reach out and reconnect with people, like family, friends, that you haven't in a while or maybe you miss and, reestablish those connections or work on healing anything that's causing a rift. This is a great time to do that, and, what nurtures you and what nurtures other people, and if you've been, um, isolating a little bit, it's time to, kinda get out there and get out and about a little bit.
Right.
Well, thank you, Justin, for joining me today and talking about the overview. It's a very active month, I would say.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, Liz. I appreciate that.
And Justin and I both do consultations, have newsletters, new YouTube channels, and are on social networks. So we enjoy you contacting us or following us. And I have plenty of other shows from you to choose from. So usually there's something that's of interest to most people. So not just the same shows. And I'll let Justin tell about his channel.
Yeah, I do both Western and Vedic astrology. So I'm a archetypal and Jyotish astrologer, and I do consultations like Liz does. And so the best way to find me is check out my videos on YouTube.
Thank you. And Justin and I will be on Talk Cosmos on July 20th for the Leo new moon. Join us there. And I want to thank my new sponsor, Astro Peregrine Software. We appreciate your support. And I want to thank the audience for joining us today and those that come back and watch at a later date. And again, thank you, Justin. And we'll see you all next time.
Yes, and, can I add one other thing in the end here, Liz, for our viewers? Maybe, uh, if you're looking for something that you wanna know coming up next month, that maybe we can answer, maybe you email Liz, and we can maybe address that in August, any planetary aspect.
Oh, that would be fun. I would like people to send in a question or something or two.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Justin, and thanks to our audience, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.